Hi everybody, GXW here again. I've got to actually move my tripod back a touch so you can see everything, at least initially here. Then I will set it back down so I can give you some information about different ways to provide light for yourself, either in a cabin or for prepper purposes or just because they're cool as hell. This is not an entire collection of all the different lanterns and lamps that I have, although these are the ones that we keep around the house, ready to go at all times. I'm going to do a series of three videos each on the Dietz flat wick lamps, probably one on Coleman pressurized propane, and another one on electric alternatives and the fact versus fiction of some of the different means of providing yourself for fuel. I guess I'll start off at the top here, and this will, like I said, be a quick overview video. At that point, I will branch off and go into more detail. But basically, when you're trying to provide light, you have to ask yourself what kind of light you're trying to provide. I'm not being a smartass. I'm serious in the sense that there are lights that are great for finding your way to the can at 2 o'clock in the morning, but it'll also be a miserable nightmare if you try and do anything important by them. They're not adequate as task lights, and certainly not singularly. I've seen a room at one point that was lit with 24 Dietz flat wick lanterns, and although you could certainly, pick out faces and sit and have a conversation, and if you happen to be lucky enough to be right next to one or with outside the shadow but close enough to be in the light of it, you could probably have read, but I know it wouldn't be good for your eyes. Alright, so we might as well start out with the weakest in terms of light output here, and that is a simple flat wick 7/8 cheap lamp. It has a toothed gear that runs the wick up and down, and it's normally put back down in there. I'll mention this again in my video on flat wick non-pressurized lanterns, but suffice it to say, the fuel you want to burn in these is kerosene. The world is awash in supposedly ultra pure, high quality lamp oil. People brag about it having a higher flash point, things like that. But the truth is, kerosene burns brighter and slightly more efficiently than any other fuel I'm aware of for these lamps. And I know it's brighter in side-by-side comparisons I've done myself. If I'm mistaken and somebody has a magic fuel that isn't also mixing in something else with it, I'd love to have a link to a video about it. But for general purposes, kerosene is probably the go-to fuel for flat wick lamps. This is a very cheap stamped metal burner, although it works just fine, attached to a slightly nicer large font. I purchased this font at a second-hand store because it's so large. It holds more than double what most of the what Lamplighter Farms or maybe that's the wrong name, any of the companies at Bi-Mart or Walmart that are selling these things have a small font. This one will burn for easily in excess of 40 hours on what's in there at a reasonable setting. This is definitely not a task light unless the task in question is putting on a pair of shoes or something like that. This light, because of the shape of the burner, and all flat wick lamps, generally speaking, will have a wide shadow. That is to say, if you hold it up in the air or have it on any kind of a hanger from the ceiling, there's an area of deep shadow down at an angle where, of course, the flame doesn't reach. Some wall mounts have a reflector mounted behind the lamp on the wall, which helps reduce that and cast more light into the room, but under no circumstances would you consider this a reading lamp, unless you happen to have 8 of them and you're sitting somehow in the center. Alright, next guy on the list. These two lanterns are very closely related, but they have a couple of differences. This is a Dietz, a Chinese Dietz, after the became no longer an American company. This is a Dietz Air Pilot. It's quite bright, I would say, and this is, bear in mind, you know, by eye, not at all by, you know, any kind of official measurement. I don't have the necessary equipment to measure lux or lumen output or anything like that. But the Air Pilot is probably 2.5 to 4 times as bright as this basic flat-wick draft lamp. I will get into hot blast versus cold blast lanterns when I do a more in-depth video on Dietz. It has a great deal in common with this monster. This is one of my personal favorite lamps, just to have around for everything. It's called the Dietz Jupiter, also known as a model 2500. It's roughly as bright as the Air Pilot, that is to say, you know, give or take 3 or 4 times as bright as a standard flat-wick lamp. However, the 2500 has a massive 80-ounce font. People say, I mean, more than 70 some odd hours of burning with kerosene with one of these lanterns before having to refuel it. These both came from a company which I will put in the video at this point. Alright, so the Dietz 2500 and the Air Pilot have a secret identity, especially the 2500. This was actually known as a greenhouse or a chicken coop heater because it will throw 750 or more BTU of heat in addition to providing the light of, I don't know, 15 to 18 candles at a time. I've also found that since these two have similar light output, I'd imagine they also produce similar amounts of heat. In fact, there are cooking attachments, and they should be called warmers, not cookers, but which replace this cap and will, you know, let you heat up your coffee or a can of beans or something on top. And believe me, they get hot. I don't know how well the camera will capture the difference in color, the green of this lid versus the very classic blue of the rest of the lantern. Alright, now we're moving into the higher tech stuff. Well, at least the one on the left is very much high tech, and the one on the right is kind of a common but extremely useful lamp if you know its limitations. This one here is a propane cartridge powered Coleman North Star. It uses a large double-ended mantle that is called an, I believe, N95 or 95 type mantle, and when I do my review and video on this lamp specifically, I will go ahead and show you guys how to use a less expensive mantle that's actually the same if not brighter, and we'll get to that soon. Alright, continuing a little brief commentary about this Coleman North Star. These are very bright. A lot of them have a built-in piezoelectric igniter, and in my review I'll get into the good and bad about that. They get to about the brightness of a 75 or 80 watt bulb. Even with these tall mantles, they just tend to flutter, and the light they produce isn't super even. Some people are also sensitive to the sound and the rushing noise of the propane and the slight flutter, although they're bright enough to, if you're not bothered by that, read by to perform reasonably detailed tasks, and of course they'll flood an area that's quite large with light. Last but not least in this overview is another Coleman product. This guy is somewhat hard to come by, and now there are competitors on the market that offer the same whopping light output. This is electric. It's a Coleman CPX6 compatible lantern, which means it takes either D cells or, bear with me a second, or a rechargeable battery pack. When I do my detailed review of this lantern, I will also go into the details of how that works and what I think of it. One thing I will do, since the lighting is such that you probably wouldn't get much of an idea for most of these lamps, seeing them against the outside light and this hazy Oregon day, but I will turn on this one because it is so bright. It's a little over 1,000 lumens. They advertise 1,000, but even on low, where it has like a moonlight mode, it's very evident. Give me just a moment. So this is the smallest setting. The lowest setting. The flicker you're seeing is probably from the switch mode LED supply. This is claiming 80 lumens, and in a dark room it's still bright enough to perform tasks which any of the flat-wick lanterns would make into a struggle, although it's by no means a powerful reading light. The middle setting is several hundred lumens, and even though, again, you're seeing the flickering and the adjustment of the camera cutting it down, that's 400 to 500 lumens, and you can easily read by it if you're sitting in such a position as to have the light falling on what you're doing. And then last but not least, it has an extraordinarily powerful mode, which is, in my opinion, 1,000 lumens. I mean, it's about a 65 watt bulb, but it's very white, a true white, almost not blue, but definitely a closer to 4,800 Kelvin sort of a color temperature. It has also an SOS flasher, which, you know, I'll get into why that's annoying the way they have it laid out, but one more press turns it off. It's a chip on board, or I should say remote phosphor lamp with a large heatsink underneath cooling the LEDs, and then they're projecting their light onto that triangular component. This lantern is very bright, and it has served quite well. It's dead silent, and it does a good job throwing light when you need it in a hurry, and I will discuss feeding each of these critters in a future video.